William Howard Taft, born September 15, 1857, Cincinnati, Ohio, U.S. died March 8, 1930, Washington, D.C., was the 27th President of the United States, 1909-13, and 10th Chief Justice of the United States, 1921-30. As the choice of Pres. Theodore Roosevelt to succeed him and carry on the progressive Republican agenda, Taft as president alienated the progressives and later Roosevelt, thereby contributing greatly to the split in Republican ranks in 1912, to the formation of the Bull Moose Party, also known as the Progressive Party, and to his humiliating defeat that year in his bid for a second term. The son of Alphonso Taft, Secretary of War and Attorney General, 1876-77, under Pres. Ulysses S. Grant, and Louisa Maria Torrey, Taft graduated second in his Yale class of 1878, studied law, and was admitted to the Ohio bar in 1880. Drawn to politics in the Republican Party, he served in several minor appointive offices until 1887, when he was named to fill the unfinished term of a judge of the Superior Court of Ohio. The following year he was elected to a 5-year term of his own, the only time he ever attained office via popular vote other than his election to the presidency. From 1892 to 1900 he served as a judge of the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, where he made several decisions hostile to organized labor. He upheld the use of an injunction to stop a strike by railroad workers, and he declared illegal the use of a secondary boycott. On the other hand, he upheld the rights of workers to organize, to join a union, and to strike, and he extended the power of the injunction to enforce antitrust laws. Taft resigned his judgeship on March 15, 1900, to accept appointment by Pres. William McKinley to serve as chairman of the Second Philippine Commission. Charged with organizing civil government in the islands following the Spanish-American War, 1898, Taft displayed considerable talent as an executive and administrator. In 1901 he became the first civilian governor of the Philippines, concentrating in that post on the economic development of the islands. Fond of and very popular among the Philippine people, Taft twice refused to leave the islands when offered appointment to the Supreme Court by Pres. Theodore Roosevelt. In 1904 he agreed to return to Washington to serve as Roosevelt's Secretary of War, with the stipulation that he could continue to supervise Philippine affairs. Although dissimilar in both physique and temperament, the rotund, easygoing Taft and the muscular, almost manic Roosevelt nonetheless became close friends. The president regarded his Secretary of War as a trusted advisor. When Roosevelt declined to run for re-election, he threw his support to Taft, who won the 1908 Republican nomination and defeated Democrat William Jennings Bryan in the Electoral College by 321 votes to 162. Progressive Republicans, who had found their champion in Theodore Roosevelt, now expected Roosevelt's hand-picked successor to carry forward their reform agenda. However, progressives soon found abundant reason to be disappointed with Taft. Temperamentally, he lacked Roosevelt's compelling leadership qualities, which had inspired people to charge into battle against all that was wrong in American society. Politically, Taft offended progressives when he failed to appoint any from their ranks to his cabinet. He further angered progressives when he backed the Payne-Aldrich Tariff of 1909, a highly protectionist measure that ironically was the product of a special session of Congress called, by Taft, to revise tariff rates downward. Progressives, who favored lower tariffs, expected a veto. When Taft not only signed the tariff but called it the best bill that the party has ever passed, the rupture in Republican ranks seemed unlikely to be mended. Despite his close relationship with Roosevelt, Taft as president aligned himself with the more conservative members in the Republican Party. He did prove to be a vigorous trust buster, however, launching twice as many antitrust prosecutions as had his progressive predecessor. He also backed conservation of natural resources, another key component of the progressive reform program. But when he fired Gifford Pinchot, head of the Bureau of Forestry, ardent conservationist and close friend of Roosevelt, Taft severed whatever support he still had among Republican progressives. Get a Britannica premium subscription and gain access to exclusive content. Subscribe now. Roosevelt returned from an African safari in 1910, and progressives quickly urged him to come out publicly in opposition to his political protege. At first Roosevelt declined to criticize Taft by name, but by 1912 a breach between the former friends was clearly evident. When Roosevelt decided to challenge Taft for the Republican presidential nomination, the two attacked each other mercilessly in the Republican primary elections. The primary results proved beyond doubt that Republican voters wanted Roosevelt to be the party's standard-bearer in 1912, but Taft's forces controlled the convention and secured the nomination for the incumbent. Believing that the convention had been rigged and that their man had been cheated out of the nomination he deserved, Republican progressives bolted their party to form the Bull Moose, or Progressive, Party and nominated Roosevelt as their presidential candidate. The split in Republican ranks assured the election of Democrat Woodrow Wilson. Roosevelt came in a distant second, and Taft, capturing less than a quarter of the popular vote, won just 2 states, Utah and Vermont. In the Electoral College, Taft set a record for the poorest performance by an incumbent president seeking re-election. He won a mere 8 electoral votes compared with 88 for Roosevelt and 435 for Wilson. As president, Taft frequently claimed that politics makes me sick. Never eager for the office, he had been prodded to pursue it by his wife, Helen Herron Taft, whom he had married in 1886. As First Lady, she was a key political advisor to her husband. On his departure from the White House, Taft returned to Yale, where he became a professor of constitutional law. With the entry of the United States into World War I, he served on the National War Labor Board, and at the war's conclusion he strongly supported American participation in the League of Nations. In 1921 Pres. Warren G. Harding appointed Taft Chief Justice of the United States, launching what was probably the happiest period in Taft's long career in public service. He promptly took steps to improve the efficiency of the Supreme Court, which had fallen far behind in its work. His influence was decisive in securing passage of the Judges Act of 1925, which gave the Supreme Court greater discretion in choosing its cases so that it could focus more attention on constitutional questions and other issues of national importance. Although generally conservative in his judicial philosophy, Taft was no rigid ideologue. His approval of court injunctions, for example, was limited by his insistence that injunctions could not be employed to interfere with the rights of workers to organize and strike. His most important contribution to constitutional law was his opinion in Myers v. United States, 1926, upholding the authority of the President to remove federal officials, a much belated endorsement of the position taken by Andrew Johnson with respect to the Tenure of Office Act in his impeachment trial in 1868. Suffering from heart disease, Taft resigned as Chief Justice on February 3, 1930, and he died a little more than a month later. William Taft was the 27th President, 1909 to 1013, and 10th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, 1921 to 1930. Taft was the only chief executive in the nation's history to serve first as president and then as Chief Justice. Thus, he became the only person in history to ever head 2 branches of the federal government, the executive and the judicial. Taft, the nation's largest president, stood over 6 feet tall and weighed over 300 pounds. A special bathtub was made in the White House to accommodate him. He enjoyed athletics, especially baseball. He is credited with starting the tradition of the presidents throwing out the first pitch in the first game of the World Series, as well as with initiating the 7th inning stretch. He was a good dancer and an accomplished equestrian, who rode daily. Born on September 15, 1857, in Cincinnati, Ohio, William Taft was the son of Alphonso Taft, Secretary of State for President Grant. He was educated at Yale University and graduated second in his class. His also graduated from the Cincinnati Law School and then married Helen Herron in 1886. He then spent most of the next 20 years the courtroom as an attorney and later as a judge. In addition, he served as assistant district attorney, as a collector for the Internal Revenue Service in Cincinnati, and as Solicitor General of the United States, and as a judge of the Circuit Court of Appeals. He chaired a commission to establish civil government in the Philippines after the Spanish-American War, and he served as its first civilian governor. As governor of the Philippines, William Taft set up the local government and the judicial system. He also helped settle land disputes between the churches and government officials. During his first administration, Theodore Roosevelt appointed Taft Secretary of War. While serving in this capacity, Taft directed construction of the Panama Canal, established the Canal Zone government, and helped upgrade the United States Army. He also participated in the negotiations that would end the Russo-Japanese War, and he helped Japan settle an immigration conflict. On 2 occasions, Theodore Roosevelt offered him a seat on the Supreme Court, but Taft turned him down both times. When Roosevelt chose not to run in the 1908 presidential election, he persuaded the Republican Party to nominate Taft, who easily won the election. Because of his experience in law and government, William Taft was as highly qualified as any president who had held the office up to that time, but his administration was less than happy. Taft signed a tariff bill that angered the progressive wing of the Republican Party, especially Roosevelt. The Taft administration also passed parcel post reforms and workmen's compensation laws. It was during the Taft presidency that Congress passed the 16th Amendment to levy an income tax on the American people, and the 17th Amendment, which allowed election of United States senators by popular vote. William Taft also established the Federal Children's Bureau, had the Mann-Elkins Act passed, and signed the Publicity Act. The Mann-Elkins Act placed the telephone, telegraph, radio, cable services, and other communications companies under the control of the Interstate Commerce Commission, ICC. The Publicity Act required political parties to account for the money spent on federal campaigns. Taft wanted to expand the influence of the United States overseas, so he started a plan called dollar diplomacy, which encouraged United States banks and businesses to make investments abroad. He was not above using the Marines to accomplish his objectives. Roosevelt broke with Taft in 1910, and ran as a third-party candidate on the Progressive or Bull Moose ticket in the election of 1912. This split the Republican Party and their votes, giving an easy victory to Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. Unlike Teddy Roosevelt before him, Taft was very unhappy as chief executive, and when he left the White House in 1913, he told incoming President, Woodrow Wilson, "I'm glad to be going. This is the loneliest place in the world." The years following his term as president were Taft's most fulfilling and productive. He became a professor at Yale Law School in 1913, headed the League to Enforce Peace in 1915, and served as co-chairman of the National War Labor Board in 1917. He found his greatest fulfillment was when President Harding appointed him Chief Justice in 1921. As Chief Justice he reduced the Supreme Court's backlog and got the court to look at property rights and governmental limitation more conservatively. He was instrumental in getting the Judiciary Act of 1925 passed, giving the justices more control when selecting cases to be heard. William Taft administrated the Supreme Court efficiently, and through his lobbying efforts, Congress passed laws to strengthen the court's power. Another far-reaching program Chief Justice Taft voted for was the minimum wage. Taft was the only former president to ever give the oath of office to an incoming president. He performed this honor for both Coolidge and Hoover. On March 8, L 930, only 1 month after retiring from the Supreme Court, William Taft died. He was the first president to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Thank you for watching this video.